Okay, hi and welcome everybody and good afternoon. Welcome to the Utopian Future session. First, I'd like to congratulate everybody for finding the room. We know it wasn't the easiest to find and we thank you for making your way over here. So we'd first like to thank all our speakers today for making time in their agendas. We'd also like to thank the audience for finding it and for being here with us. And of course, we'd like to thank our gracious hosts. So our schedule is very tight. We don't have much time, and therefore, without further ado, I'd like to ask Luc van Langenhoven to come up. And Luc is the Rector's Commissioner for International Networks and Institutes at the VUB and Vice President for the VUB for Utopia. So welcome, Luc, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Quite happy to be here because this is a rather unique event. Unique in the sense that two alliances of European universities are joining forces. It's the Civic Alliance on the one hand. Is it right?
Yeah, sorry.
And the Utopia one on the other hand. And I'm particularly glad, of course, that in one alliance you have the ULB as a partner, in the other alliance you have the VUB. So all of this is a kind of first joint activity of two networks, two alliances, and we hope that in the future we can do other things. We can do more, let's say, content-related development issues from both the alliances. I was asked to give a bit of an introduction, or to the real introduction will be given by my colleague Luc Soete, so I can be very quick. And actually, I just want to read to you a quote that I think points to the problematic that is on the agenda today, the future of higher education in Europe. And the quote goes as follows: "We are at a critical and indeed historical point with regard to the significance of higher education. The real challenge is now to discover how new relevance can be found to ensure that higher education is fully responsive to change." It goes on, "It is now time to reassess the functions of higher education and to find future needs and specific," I can't read my own handwriting. Anyway, so I'll skip that. "The time has come indeed to look for a new start of higher education." This, I think, is a quote that probably most of you can endorse, at least I can endorse it. The only problem with the quote is it's from the OECD report that was issued in 1973. And ever since, we have seen people saying the same thing. We have to do something about higher education. We have to change higher education, and nothing much happens. And the whole discipline structure and you know all the problems with that related to that just continue. And today, of course, if you jump from the 70s to now, we can see that a number of very important things have been happening. First of all, it's the global awareness that we are living in what is called sometimes the Anthropocene. The fact that we live in an environment that is affected by human beings, and that if we don't take care, climate change will become a very, very problematic issue, even to the extent that it can lead to the extinction of humankind. Secondly, between the 70s and now, we have seen the rise of the knowledge society, the information technology revolution. We have seen what is called the digital disruption. And this, of course, has major effects on how learning processes should be organized. And then three, we also see worldwide that the world order that we have been used to function in since World War II is somehow under strain, is changing, and although we don't know yet how the next world order will look like, we can feel that it's in the middle of changes. So climate change, Anthropocene, knowledge society, the changing global world order are the new challenges of today. And it is with that in mind that we have to prepare our students to be citizens of the future, to work on realizing that future. That, I think, is the essence of the future of higher education. So without further ado, I want to give the floor now to the Dean of the Brussels School of Governance, Luc Soete, who is also former rector of Maastricht University and an old friend of the house. Luc, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luc. I thought first that, as usual, I would be confused with Luc, and that the slides were going to be presented by Luc van Langenhoven, because we've had some quite nice memories of funny happenings happening between us, me being presented as Luc van Langenhoven and Luc van Langenhoven being presented as Luc Suter. So it's very nice to be here, and I'm delighted to be able to address this to all the people from Utopia and from Civis. When I was still rector at Maastricht University, I was involved in another network, as you know, the Young European Universities Network, which was called UFE, and they are also a partner in the same spirit. So I will be relatively critical because I would like to incite, of course, your reflections of the future, and a little bit in the line of what Luc van Langenhoven just mentioned with respect to what has happened and how, to what extent can these European university alliances, are they fit for the future, so to say. So let me just go quickly over the first, oops, let's see whether I have to use this one. Yeah, thank you. So first of all, let me say a couple about how research and education has entered into the European attention over the last, say, 50 years. And of course, the idea first, it appeared, of course, with research, and it was very much in line with the ideas of a European single market. And so the ideas were that really research should benefit in the same way as other goods, services in Europe, in the European Union, in the same way, from the exchange of people, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of also publications, etc. And of course, if you look at it over the past, you can say that certainly at the level of research, the creation of the European research area is really a copy straight from the ideas of a single market. Removal of regulatory restrictions on mobility, harmonization of various administrative appointment rules for researchers, allowing for greater mobility between researchers and employment opportunities across the European Union, as reflected in the creation of a European research area, as it's written here in this first bullet point. And there, of course, emerged outside of the European Commission itself, separately emerged the European Research Council, which was an initiative, of course, of the academic community itself, of the research universities themselves, and which created this ERC in 2007, and which was, of course, further instrumental and fitted even more the ideas of a single market. But most of the key component, which was really this idea of portability of ERC grants, which is a quite unique phenomenon when you reflect on it. That is that researchers can indeed carry on their grant across Europe to the best place they consider to carry out their research. And I think from this perspective, this has been the ERC itself, which of course developed these very straightforward, very simple rules, without much, administrative bureaucracy around it, and quite simple in terms of no thematic priorities, groundbreaking, high risk, high gain research, well funded, open to researchers from any nationality, age, and gender to perform research in Europe, selected purely on international high quality peer review. And I think this has been also a major impetus also into the national research councils. I think FAO, that you remember that the same way in which this complementarity between European funding at the research level and national research funding went hand in hand in some regions, such as Flanders, much more possibly than in some countries, such as the Netherlands. But nevertheless, there was a very clear common view in there about the mobility of research, whether it is embodied within people or whether it is in terms of the exchange of goods, such as publications. And of course, this fitted very neatly the open science movement afterwards. And you can see that all this is part of the same kind of view. When you look at this research, you remember that also in the end of the 2007, 2008 was the idea also of even the president of the European Commission, Barroso, with this idea of an MIT. Remember often the stories that his daughter wanted to go to university and she chose for MIT, and he was flabbergasted by this initiative and, of course, launched this idea of creating a European IT, an EIT. And you see that the whole debate about how can you create a European top technological university was, of course, an issue which clearly was a bridge too far and was created the complexity of the EIT as it still exists with all its kicks and all the various other initiatives which were taken. But this was all research-led and to some extent very clear. The main challenge here was really, how do I create mobility? So mobility was the driver to some extent of these initiatives. And you see that the parallel with, of course, higher education then emerged. And as much as I would argue that with research, the logic of the single market principles were relatively straightforward, with higher education, of course, the issue is much more, how do you organize it, given the fact, of course, that the European Commission and the European budget has a relatively small budget on higher education because it's not in the prerogatives of the European Commission to organize education or higher education at the European level. It is really the national prerogative in the first instance. So this is, of course, the first issue, that higher education is an area by and large outside of the prerogatives of the European Commission. And that's also reflected in the budgetary means, which have always been relatively small if you look at DG EAC and what it had. But similar to the European research area, a European higher education area was created, and again outside to some extent of the European Commission, because it was a follow-up of the Bologna process, and it was in 2007 was this European higher education area created. And again, if you look at the purpose, this is again perfectly in line with the single market principles. The idea was to ensure more comparable, compatible and coherent higher education systems in Europe, with as main goal increasing staff and students' mobility and facilitating employability across the European Union. So again, the same principle of single markets. And of course came then the success story at the political level, which is of course that all these Erasmus programs became very popular with politicians, because many of the European commissioners themselves had participated in an Erasmus program. I think of the current commission, maybe some people might know this better than I do, how many have done Erasmus programs. I think it's probably half or something like that of all the current commissioners. So the political idea of having an Erasmus generation in Europe of youngsters having followed higher education, having had the mobility of going from one university, one country to another, was of course something which was reflected, and it's reflected of course in the budget, which increased dramatically. And you have, as you see here, it is now for the Erasmus Plus program, it is now 26.2 billion, which is nearly double the previous budget, etc. And again, it has this strong budget earmarked for mobility opportunities extended now to also lifelong learning perspective, no longer the generation of students who happen to be students in universities. The question, of course, I put to you, and I think it's in line with what Luc said in his introduction, is there not a time here for a clear reassessment of this? Because we have the European Green Deal, we have the Paris Conventions, we have targets to achieve in 2030, 2050, which we all have committed, governments have committed themselves. And how is this reflected then in this idea of increasing mobility, prioritizing the employment opportunities across the European Union, from a perspective which of course has always raised quite fundamental questions with economists. I'm myself an economist, and the first issue which we have been discussing in the economic literature since a long time is of course the way in which this mobility generates, typically, if you look at the research level, that's the clearest, but also at the higher education level, it creates, of course, the typical Matthew effect of attracting those places which are strongest in research will attract, of course, the most talented researchers. Look at the ERC grantees where they go to. And it will, of course, attract primarily also at the university level in terms of teaching, many talents coming to the places which they consider as the ones which are the most appropriate for them. Whether they return to the place of origin where they came from remains totally open. And of course, you can see this in many of the political reflections between research funding and regional funding, that the balance emerged systematically. And that if you look indeed, I remember discussing it with my minister in the Netherlands, when she said to me, look, you know, I'm confronted with the minister from Croatia or from other countries who's saying, look, you know, how is this continuing? And she addressed this question to me as rector of Maastricht University, which of course has more than 60% of its students coming from other European countries. And the biggest increases this next academic year is again Southern Europe. It's again the periphery, the southern periphery of Europe, including also Eastern European countries. So, as an economist, again, the interest of Maastricht and of my region is, of course, to attract that talent, because we need it. We desperately need that talent. So there's an active policy on the one side of Europe to attract talent to the places where you need them. You offer education in English. You offer to the typical, whatever, Greek, Croatian student coming to Maastricht, he will be offered English teaching, and he will be, of course, have to be fluent in English in order to follow the courses. He will receive for free basic Dutch to communicate with the local environment, to do his shopping and to interact with the people. And he will go back, or he will not go back, we hope, as rector of a university, you hope they will stay and they will go into the various regions, desperate needs for highly talented scientists. And so this Matthew effect has always been a big issue, but it's been an issue which has never really been addressed at core and at center. And this is, of course, the first big issue, is to what extent this brain drain and this issue about brain circulation, as we like to present it under the form of an Erasmus generation, is really an Erasmus generation, or whether it is simply a generation whereby brains are continuously sucked from the periphery down to the centers of higher education. This holds for Maastricht, it holds, I would say, as much for Brussels. So how do we respond to this? Then comes in this initiative of the European University Alliances as a new initiative, as you all know, when it was introduced by President Macron, and as an idea to increase the excellence, primarily of many French universities, but more generally to create a European university system or framework. And here too, the question is, of course, how can we bring these European University Alliances more in line with some of those sustainability challenges? And that's what I would like to look at more closely now. So, first of all, I mentioned this already, so I can skip by and large to this, but this higher education mobility, how can we, from the perspective of European University Alliances, respond to this fear of Matthew, this Matthew effect, and go more in depth into local sustainability challenges and local sustainability responses? And I think this is really where many economists have been writing about this in terms of how we can, through twinning, through various other exercises, as you know, in Horizon Europe, in the Framework Program 7, where several ideas of teaming, of various other ways in which universities from the more developed or more richer, rather, areas would indeed assist and would be linked to universities in other places in the periphery to try to develop within these peripheries further developments. And that is something which I think where the European University Alliances could indeed emerge as a way to focus on how they could create employability in their different partners, and that the differences in terms of levels of development in which the universities are located could actually be a positive feature in terms of developing this kind of interchange and employability of skilled labor across the alliance itself. And that is where I think the insistence in the European University Alliances to include countries and universities from peripheries, also to include not just universities, but higher education schools, training schools, etc., is something which is, I think, is a major improvement on this brain circulation. I call it brain circulation, effectively a brain drain. Let me give you one specific example, and this is an example outside of my framework, outside of Civis framework, outside of the Utopia framework, and that is the University of Delft. The University of Delft, which up to now was pretty distant from being interested in this European University Alliances, and is a technical university, so it's like you have it both in Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria. Just in the Netherlands, you also have technical universities, which are not complete, but only have engineering faculties, applied sciences faculties, etc. And Delft is one of the, I would say, the best ranked university in the Netherlands. I can say this as somebody who's not involved in this. What Delft did, and what is interesting in its strategic plan, is to put it forward to the university to argue that we will be sustainable in 2030. Not 2050, but 2030, complete. So that includes everything from water use, food, energy use, CO2 emissions on the whole line. And this is followed in terms of a sustainability plan in which you really develop that plan as year by year you check with your indicators how far you are, how you have made progress, etc. And you, of course, have a system, an internal system in terms of pricing of CO2, $150 a ton, which is a high figure, but that allows you to generate revenues in order to compensate where you need desperately. The interesting feature about this is that the university becomes completely very different from what it was before. The university becomes as if it were responsible now also, given this total sustainability picture, it becomes responsible for its students. It becomes responsible for its staff. So it has to make sure that its staff and its students are sustainable in their behavior, in their housing, in their travel, in their mobility. So if I look at it now through the eyes of Maastricht University and my experience, we always at the university said, look, well, the housing issue is a problem of the city. Where they are located, how they are housed, how they behave, the parties in the weekends, etc. We have nothing to do with it. It's the city and it's the interaction between the students' associations and the city, which are the ones who will carry it out. And we can, of course, call upon students' associations to behave in different ways, etc., when there are accidents which happen, etc. But otherwise, the responsibility of the university is limited to its role, its central role, i.e. education. When the students enter the colleges, then we are responsible. In this vision, you turn it completely upside down. And it is as you, as university, are responsible to make sure that in the city, there are sufficient student housing, which is sustainable. And if it isn't there, you have to interact with the city, with developers, etc., to start building or constructing housing which is indeed sustainable. You are responsible also for the mobility. So you are indeed in charge to some extent of to make sure that the public transport is sustainable coming to your university. Now, of course, in places like Delft or in places like Brussels, that's relatively straightforward. It's very different if you look at one of the peripheral regions, etc. But this view is interesting because it changes totally the organization and the responsibility of universities, in the sense that their clients, their students, their suppliers, their staff are now becoming the central responsibility at the university level of how you manage, how you provide incentives, how you, whether this is through whatever, bikes, free bikes, etc. But you indeed become responsible, and everything which is not in line with achieving this total sustainability in 2030 is something which will have to be paid for. So you have an internal system of payment and of stick and carrots, etc., which will work with respect to various services, faculties, etc. So I think it's interesting to look at this from this perspective, in the sense that this provides, of course, it's a technical university, so you have to deal with engineers who have a much more sort of applied focus in terms of trying to solve problems. That's really their training. So you have a better environment than in universities which have the full spectrum of all disciplines, etc. But nevertheless, when you look at it, and the picture which you see here on the right is the photo, what is written underneath is the carbon footprint of the TU Delft in the year 2019 expressed as forest areas required to sequester all CO2 equivalent emissions from the university. With the borders of the city of Delft, gray lines, which you can see, and the domain of TU Delft, which is the white patch in the middle. So basically, Delft University produces more CO2 in the surface than the full city of Delft. So you have a major responsibility with respect to the city on how you can reduce this. Now, of course, this brings you to that the local environment of the city of Delft becomes very crucial in the way how you can address it and how you can reduce it. And this, of course, brings me to the regional dimension and the local dimension, and why this is absolutely becoming crucial, even in these kind of university networks. Because suddenly, the case of Delft, which is also now part of an alliance, the Enhanced Alliance of Technical Universities, is of course that the situation in Delft is very different. It's a situation from Brussels, for instance. It's a situation with rising sea levels, a situation of a main port, Rotterdam, with all the problems of fossil fuel entry, chemical industry being located there, another city, The Hague, next door, etc. It's within an environment which is a sea environment with all the problems of future sea level rising, etc., and how you address those and how you will provide solutions, etc. That's very different from a situation where you have, say, when you talk about Brussels, which will be completely different and where social inclusion, etc., will be much different. The city of Delft, I think it's about 80% of the people living in the city of Delft are working at the university. It's a typical university with a C. It's very different from a situation where you live in a metropole like Brussels and where you, of course, have very different activities and very different populations. So for me, this is the line in which you can see that how we should move further with higher education in Europe. For me, higher education in Europe should become the central institution, building the bridges locally in terms of how you can anchor sustainability within your own mission as university. That means in practice that you should to some extent become in this local environment, you should become the guidepost for others in that environment to show the way towards a sustainable development and to come, as I put it here, an application bridge between scientific excellence and local regional relevance. And when I look at the program here of today, then I can see that each time you can see these interactions between both Utopia interventions on, for instance, inclusion and Civis interactions also in terms of sustainability. So for me, these are the two driving forces in terms of how the alliances can make their own picture or their own image of how they strive towards this sustainability in the long term and how they can be examples for other alliances and for other university of higher education institutions which are not part of such European University Alliance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luc Soete. So now I have the pleasure actually to lead on from that beautifully somehow introduced next session. Thank you for the food for thought. And we have 4 speakers coming up next. I will call you all 4 on the stage and I will introduce you. So please come up as I introduce you and then everybody can take their stand for their respective presentations. So first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Rosette Siegas, who is on her way up. As coordinator for Utopia Work Package Education and Students, Karina Mallard, who's coming up on the other side, they keep it exciting. Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Gothenburg and also leads TRAIN, which for the Civis also that are amongst us is the research and innovation project within the Utopia Alliance. And then, as you know, this is a cross-alliance session. So we also have the pleasure to welcome 2 representatives from Civis. So Leticia Martinez Garcia, I hope I pronounced your name okay. Welcome. Leticia is the Civis Project Coordinator, European Liaison Office from the Université Libre de Bruxelles, who is kindly hosting us today. And last but definitely not least, Benjamin Lyons, Research Coordinator at the ELB and co-chair of the Civis Hub on Cities, Territories and Mobility. So welcome everyone. So to give you a little bit of context, all our speakers have been given a brief, which is to provide us some policy recommendations from education and research. So first, we will invite Rosette to the stand and provide us, yes, it's all yours, from the context of education from Utopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. All right. Oh, it's this one. Yeah, it's this one, yeah.
Faster than technology. That's a good start.
Okay, and it's just here to,
Yeah.
okay. All right, yeah, you can. Okay, good afternoon. Talking about progress, in 1974, in this very building, I started my career as a teaching assistant at VUB. In those times, we still met ULB people at a daily basis. There were teachers and students and researchers working together, let's say, in an automatic way, because we were working in the same building and the same campus. So yeah, now we need things like an European alliance and cross-alliance meetings as to find each other. But well, that's life. It tends to get complicated. But let's talk about Utopia. Utopia, as all European alliances, is a pilot experiment that we started off in end 2019 for a 3-year period with a budget of, for the original 6 alliance members, of about 6 million, so roughly speaking, 300,000 per year per university. And we then invited, and we're very grateful to have supplementary members starting last year in 21, and we already are working with them. So trained as an economist, it's the day for the economists, really. Yeah, you tend to see a few caveats of this kind of projects, because yes, what was our major ambition? To build an innovative model for the university of the future, and all this in the limits of time and budget that I just mentioned. So the more important caveat that we observed was, of course, that 3 years is very short. It's very short to impose any kind of development and fundamental change in an educational development. We all know, Luc just referred to it, more than 20 years we have been building the Bologna agreements, but despite all these efforts, we are still working, as for education, that is in a highly regulated context with, okay, perhaps limited differences, but nevertheless a context that is different at the level of registration fees, curriculum development, academic calendar, governance and decision making, etc., etc. So we knew that it was or we thought, especially as our alliance, is not an alliance that goes back like 50 years ago, but relatively new universities that work together for the first time, or have been working together on a bilateral basis, but not as a cross-campus network. So we knew that these were going to be barriers, and that's why we tried to find a common denominator present already on our campuses, that we then could use as the start of something that was going to be worthwhile supporting, and that was going to be empowered by cross-national, cross-campus cooperation. And the common denominator that we observed after a brief analysis was, in fact, that in many of our universities, we found a lot of motivated teachers that were, in fact, working with innovative practices in active-based, in challenge-based learning. And this became, in fact, the result and the focus of our educational model. So we saw a lot of good practices in research-inspired, challenge-based teaching, and we found them on all campuses. This was, we thought, perfectly compatible with the openness that the EU was promoting for these kind of alliances. And so we started to select, and then I don't have to forget, yeah, these are our 10 partners as they are today. And this is the result of the deliverable, in fact, of the educational model that we have created now in the last phase of the pilot project that is coming to an end in November 22. We're going to come back to this. It's our connected learning communities. And as said, these connected communities are in fact the result of combining existing good practices in our campuses, on our campuses today. So we started to select learning units that were already there in our degree programs, bachelor, master, postgraduate level. And we could only do this with the support of our vice rectors for education and people in similar positions in our home universities. And of course, also corresponding a lot with heads of department, faculties, etc., that really were aware of the curriculum developments in their home campuses. We organized 3 selection rounds, 2019, 2020, 21, and we identified 30 motivated teachers that were willing to take the responsibility of becoming the spill of thematic cross-campus networks where they would be cooperating with partners in the partner universities. And these thematic networks, these are our connected learning communities. And this is the way we, in fact, arrive at connecting them. Our connected learning communities emanate from learning units that are, in fact, chosen, selected, because of their ability to break down walls. We have a lot of walls in our educational landscape. And the walls that they are bringing down are, first of all, the divides between disciplines, because we work on challenged, topical-based kind of topics. So they involve several disciplines in each learning community. And a second type of wall is, of course, the wall between academic staff and students, because we have selected only teachers that are applying active learning methods. That means that staff and teachers cooperate in creating learning material, in fulfilling assignments, in enabling them to work in teams across campuses. There's also the wall between academia and society. This is also one of the walls that our CLC try to break up, because we work on a challenge-based type of pedagogical approach. This means that we are inspired or even driven sometimes by stakeholders in society in a variety of sectors that are cooperating with us, and we are involving also these stakeholders in our way of working. And then last but not least, Luc referred to inclusion. We also try to break down the wall between the so-called regular student and the non-model student. So we are now using the CLCs as a basis for a pilot project that was a supplementary project that we asked for in 21, which is called FlexLab, and which is in fact exploring the potential of our connected learning communities for being at the heart of lifelong learning models where students can, let's say, participate, combining higher education with their responsibilities as for family or for professional reasons. So at the end, in the last semester of our pilot project, I'm going back, this is the result. 30 learning communities in different phases of development. And yeah, of course, covering a wide range of topics. Let us then come to policy level. Or perhaps, yeah, different stages of development. Maybe I have to say a little thing about this. We, in fact, represented in this kind of pyramidal representation. And of course, all our communities, they start with, let's say, coming together, partners across universities, sharing resources, finding out how the other is working, what type of learning formats they are using, and how they can, in fact, share teaching and project work. In a second phase, and that's then, let's say, the communities that are already arriving at a certain maturity, they start cooperating and organizing cross-campus activities involving students, selection of students from all partners involved. And third, but not least, because this is going to be, I think, the great challenge now that is awaiting for us, we have to reintegrate this enriched material because, yeah, of course, we have to give them sustainability in the educational sense of the word. At policy level, 2 minutes. At policy level, it stays 2 minutes, that's good, because a minute ago I already saw 2 minutes. At policy level, I think we can very brief, as well as we try to avoid differences in regulations and in harmonization of educational systems, we also try to be as compatible as possible with the existing policy actions, especially at EU level. So our connected system, I think, is okay, responding to the key actions of the EU, especially for, of course, fostering innovation, because, yeah, we are, in fact, connecting innovative practices across campuses. But it's also, of course, the case for, yeah, academies have to take up societal engagement at all kinds of, for all kinds of challenges, and the challenge-driven learning is, of course, also perfect for that. And then last but not least, we try to create synergy with existing frameworks of EU policy. Our CLC are, yeah, aligned with the digital agenda because the partners in the community, they are working on digital platforms, organizing also their meetings and their preparation of cross-activity, of cross-campus activities on such a digital platform, trying to avoid, and I think that in view of sustainability, that is also an important characteristic, we try to avoid long-term mobility as well for teachers as for students, but rather orient them towards short-term intensive kind of cooperation. And yeah, there are then the means of let's say the modern formats of mobility support like BIP that are there for us. And yeah, of course, there is also synergy with the sector of employment. I referred to the Flex Lab initiative for lifelong learning. And now I come to the last synergy that I can think of, and then I think I can hand over to Karina, because she's going to say a lot more about this. We also try, of course, to bridge the divide between education and research, because in our connected communities, we have motivated teachers, but these motivated teachers are, of course, also responsible for research and for innovation. And that's why in Utopia More, we agree that instead of creating separate initiatives for learning and for research, we are going to have a more integrated view on our communities and trying to transform them in integrated learning and knowledge communities. But I think that as for the research results in the present project, it's Karina who can take the floor. Sorry for being so long.
I will not take up more time, so please go ahead. As you can see, we have very good timekeepers. We're very active, so we're doing our best. I will be very short.
Can you bring up the presentation, please? To save time before I start, I'd just like to say thank you too for having the opportunity here to present a little bit about the research part of Utopia, which I think we have come a little bit on the way, but we have quite a lot more to do there too. So I will give you a little bit of a flavor. Maybe
Is this one?
yeah. Yeah, that looks good. Now I have 3 screens in front of me. That will be fine.
Sure.
Or you can, yeah, we could have.
Where is it?
That's perfect.
Apparently it doesn't work.
No, you need to turn it on. Okay, yeah, so just to give you a little bit of a flavor then of the research part of the Utopia. You already heard from Rosette about the alliances. I won't go into that in more details, but I think it's... No, that one. Which one is it? No.
Maybe now?
No, Marie?
Oh.
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Utopia Alliance is bringing together more and more of the research projects of different types. And at the moment, we have 4 different dimensions of research within the Alliance, and they're stemming basically from the Utopia 2050 pilot project to start with. So we have one which is focusing on, well, first in the pilot project, there was one work package that was work package 3 that was involved with more research orientated issues. Then we have developed this into the TRAIN project, which was supported by the Horizon 2020. And this is what I will talk a little bit more to you about today. We also have special programs for postdoctoral fellows in the SIF project, where Arnaud Lenant, who is the lead there, sits over here, I can see. And we also have the co-tutel projects, which is more orientated towards the PhD education. So as you can see, we have all the different levels within research in this alliance. And we also developed several different programs to within these different parts of the research projects, so that we have mobility programs, we have learning communities for young leaders in academy, and more recently we also, similar to what Rosette was describing here, we have connected research community, which we call incubators, because they are just at the start at the moment. So Utopia Train then consists of 5 work packages, which are related to the transformation modules that the Commission was asking for when we applied for this project. And this includes the common research and innovation agenda. We have innovation for the 21st century. We have open science. We also have a modules for human capital. And we're trying to develop a research support office that then can combine the different research and innovation grants offices across the alliances to work together to have an input to all of these parts. And this we're hoping to be able to present to the Commission at the end of this project. The project started in January 2021, so it will be finished at the end of next year. And we hope then to have a future European research and innovation agenda that we can present to the Commission. And the first step to this is the interim policy report, which is now due actually on Friday. So I will try and summarize a little bit about what we have come to conclusions, what we have reached challenges, but also what we have achieved and what we recommend the Commission to go ahead with within this project. Oops, now it's went back. So to start with some of the generic challenges that we have reached to is that we see that there are certainly different structures and priorities and concepts within the different institutions in the alliances. And this, of course, creates sometimes an imbalance among the allocation of resources and also to different priorities, which are difficult to overcome. And of course, we had COVID-19, and a lot of the projects that we proposed were due or sort of related to mobility, and that made that very, very difficult. It was a challenge for these new alliances partners to start to create new relationships when people basically hadn't met before. And this is true for all levels. I think it's very important to point out that this is not just the research personnel, but it's also research management. It's all the administrative staff that sort of supports. So it's at all levels that these connections must be made. So how do we address these challenges? Well, we have continued to work with both mapping the challenges, but also analysing what have sort of worked and what hasn't worked. And we think it's very important that we continue to have dialogues at all levels. Like I said, it's very important that all levels are included in these in the work. We also think that sharing and aligning interpretation of key concepts and good practices that already exist at universities is very important, building on the expertise that we already have. We think also communication to be open is obviously a key, and we are now planning more mobility when we are able to travel. But I'd like to point out a little bit, like Luke was talking about sustainability, that we also think is very, very important that we keep pace with the digital transformation and that we continue with those processes, even though we can travel now. But to do that, we also need to develop the competence in these processes. And I think that also will be a challenge that we need to work on in the project in the future. More specific to the Utopia transformation modules that we have seen that we will need to work with is the developing a common research and innovation agenda and also sharing infrastructure. And this will need time to anchor, and I think you said that too, that we need time for these things. We can't rush into things without really working through them. And that also needs to be anchored at the academic sort of institutions, not just at this sort of level that we are sitting here now. There needs to be sort of understood what the rationale is behind the agenda and what the benefits are for the different universities. We also need to develop and deploy innovation strategies. And to do this, we have to look at the cultural and structural challenges, both when it comes to the willingness, but also legality for sharing, for example, restricted information. How do we do that on a European level? Open science is, of course, related to that. And there we have noticed that partners are very at different levels of both the stages of availability for people, but also policies and how much actually is known or expertise within these areas. And we really need to strengthen the human capital. And here the recruitment processes is sort of something that we need to work on, because there are very strong, both regional and national government decisions or regulations that is outside the institutions that participate in alliances. And how do we overcome this and work together? So we think we have some tangible progress and good practices, at least so far in the project. We have signed a MOU for Open Air in Utopia to build an open resource portal. We have developed an online atlas tool, we call it, which is for keeping monitoring of incoming mobilities and also to attract talent. We have developed, as I said, the Young Leader Academy program. We have Marie Curie partnering tool, and we also have the research connected community incubators. So now to the policy suggestions to the Commission, and we have divided this in different topics. In facilitating transnational cooperation, we think that there needs to be simplification, sustainable long-term funding for seamless mobilities, and lower the thresholds both for collaboration at all levels. But we also need stable funding for the alliances, like I said, for medium long-term objectives to cover all the different dimensions. And this comes back to you, Rosette, about the education, research and innovation. And we also think it's very important that we do these things not just among the alliance or within the alliance, but also between the different alliances. And that's why, of course, it's so important today that we are here to talk to Civis about these things. When it comes to the human capital, we have not yet reached a conclusion within Utopia, and we are still working on this. And we think that we might need some more multi-dimensional approaches to assess different academic careers. A really important topic we think is digital transition, and we see that we urgently need common open resource solutions and interoperable e-infrastructure for research information, data management, data sharing and storage. And this is crucial really for being able to collaborate in the future. And to do this, we also need more professionals that can handle these things and support the researchers. We need data stewards. We think also that it's not just the research in itself we need to support in this way. It's also very important for the research and innovation that we can have these agreements between us. So we recommend to the Commission that we want to use the existent, okay, stop, yes, 2 minutes. Use existing alliances as providers for this expertise, and that we align priorities between the alliances. Finally, for the excellence, we want to create a framework within the institutions so that we can have a complete academic environments that link research, education, innovation and collaborations. We also need some research support capacities within European alliances, and there we think exchange of excellence research. We think ethical standards must be collaborated on, and we also think that it's enabled if we can share these parts with all of Europe. And I think that was a little bit related to the brain circulation. I'm a neuroscientist, I understand the brain circulation, and I think this is one way that we should work with it to share our knowledge and our expertise. So very finally, the Utopia policy recommendations is we want to have not just a top-up support, but we also think that the bottom-up approach is the most useful and needs to be flexible and also to be depending on the expertise that we already have. And we really think that if we can create the conditions for our staff, students and partners, then them themselves will be able to build these very strong structures and create the conditions that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karina Milan. We realize we have given them a very tough challenge because 10 minutes is very short. They're doing a relatively good job at keeping on time.
This is the biggest challenge.
So maybe the next speaker, Leticia Martinez Garcia, please come up, and here we will hear now an approach from Civis. So in highlighting this cross-alliance contribution. The floor is yours, Leticia, once your slides are up, of course. I just take the opportunity while we're still waiting for the slides to say that we'll take the questions all at the end. So at the very end of the session.
Hello, hi. First, let me thank our VOV colleagues for inviting me to speak today about Civis and research and the policy recommendations that we made for you. So, I think it's here. Yes, so first of all, for those of you who are not familiar with Civis, we are an alliance of now 10 universities. We have Aix-Marseille Université, we have University of Athens, we have University of Bucharest, Libre de Bruxelles, of course, Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, we have Sapienza Università di Roma, Stockholm University, Tübingen, Glasgow University, and recently Salzburg joined us. So the research objectives of Civis are varied, but we are focusing on promoting a collaborative inter-university research that can impact societal challenges. We want to strengthen interaction and co-create knowledge and skills between our researchers, academics, citizens, and so on. And we would like to reinforce as well the research links existing already between the Alliance partners through interdisciplinarity, through research infrastructures, and incentive funding for joint projects. We're also trying to stimulate a collaborative culture and innovative ways of teaching, fostering critical thinking, adaptability, and forward-looking skills. All in all, in general, we want to become a vector of change and innovation and a model for other university alliances. So the part of research, the perspective of research of Civis cannot be understood without the creation of the task force. So the task force is an ad hoc group that was created in February 2020 to support Civis research community. It ensures that all the EU offices of Civis universities are in close contact. So our objectives, among others, are the monitoring, networking, and lobbying of activities around the EU programs. We are also sharing good practices and reinforcing collaboration, and we are also scouting external EU funding opportunities, in particular, of course, in the Horizon Europe program. The activities of the task force are indeed enhancing collaborative work between the Civis EU offices. We are trying to submit joint projects, to submit to lobby together as well, because this reinforces our visibility and it also helps us to be stronger when lobbying, for example, to the European Commission. We're as well training ourselves. So, for example, we put in place a train the trainer program that is helping the EU offices to acquire skills on, for example, data management, ethics, project submission. So basically, we're training ourselves to provide better services to our researchers community. The task force is as well fostering exchanges between researchers. Last year, for example, thanks to the funds in Civis, we could launch a call for proposal exclusively dedicated to networking of researchers. So it was addressed to researchers that were already involved in the submission of a proposal, in the submission of a project. So it was quite successful, actually, and now we are trying to work towards identifying common opportunities for application of EU calls. So this is related to actually reinforcing research staff mobility, because we're focusing on two calls right now. We're focusing on the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action Program. We're focusing on postdoctoral fellowships and doctoral networks. And what we are doing is, of course, organizing an info day. So we present characteristics, we present the added value for applicants, but we also, at the same time, are creating database that collect the interest of researchers. So if a researcher is, for example, interested in becoming a supervisor for an MSc fellow, they can just come to the database, register, and someone that is interested in that particular profile can contact this researcher. Also, for doctoral networks, we are creating right now a database for partner searching. So if someone is interested in applying for a call in the health, for example, in health or in culture, the researchers can look for each other there and can start collaborating. But also the task force is in charge of looking for them opportunities and contact them. This, of course, is also reinforced by other services helping them to submit projects. For example, Q&A sessions during the whole summertime period to help them finally submit their project. This, we hope, reinforce mobility, but not only. We also hope that collaboration arises from there and that this enhances Civis attractivity at the international scale. Then Okay, it's not possible. Then the task force is also implementing 2 projects. The first one is Civis 3I, and this one was not submitted by the task force, but it's only implemented by the EU offices. So Civis 3I is a co-fund project. It means that it's partially financed by the European Commission and partially financed by the partners in the Civis 3I project. So in this case, Marseille, Madrid, Brussels, and Rome. So this will allow us to recruit 32 researchers through 2 different calls for a period of 24 months. And again, this is another way to enhance collaboration between the universities. And the other project that we are implemented within the task force is Risk for Civis. This one we submitted and we are also implementing. And this is the SWAPS project, is the very similar to what Karina was presented before, because it's the project that is really really inside, really like on the research perspective of Civis. Here, we want to define a common research and innovation strategy for the Alliance, and we want to do that how? By implementing common projects, common tools, and case studies. I will talk about it later. And the outcome of this is to have a model that we can export, and we can say to the other universities, this have worked for us, this perhaps works for you too. Then Risk for Civis is divided into 6 different modules. One, it's developing a common research and innovation strategy, sharing infrastructures, business academia cooperation, strengthening human capital, open science, and citizens and society. All these modules went through 3 different stages. We had a benchmarking period through which basically we collected all the current practices and resources. So what do you have? What do I have? And what are we missing? And then we went through a case consensus building phase that is a discussion basically in between the universities where we decide what priorities we want to address together. Then, how do we translate what we want to address together? The case studies. So this is how we translated what we wanted to focus on. For example, Module 1 will look into research profiles at the partners universities. How can we fund bottom-up collaboration? Module 2, for example, will establish one single information access point for research infrastructures. Module 3, guidelines on how to set up a startup environment or an innovation strategy. Module 4, it's more related to career development and soft skills. And for example, Module 4 and Module 5 and Module 6 will look into research assessment reform and the use of new metrics. For policy recommendation, having in consideration all that the task force is doing and all that we're doing within Risk for Civis, we have proposed to, in the 4U group, so the group that gathers the 41 alliances, that is in close contact with the Commission, is to have a long-term investment for alliances to guarantee integration in institutional strategies. That translated is basically that we don't want a Risk for Civis and Civis are seen only as projects, but we want this to become really a strategy. And we're also proposing more synergies as well, as Karina was mentioning, in the funding lines of Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe to assure coherence and commitment in the 3 missions of the university, that is education, research and innovation, and societal impact. As a 3rd policy recommendation, we would like to also continue the case studies. Yep. Okay. The case studies that I proposed in the previous slide, and we thought that the cooperation and support actions in the Horizon Europe program are perfect for it. Then, of course, we also would like to have more support for operationalization of the Common Science Agenda and for research infrastructure sharing. And that's it from me. Sorry, I think I got 1 more minute or so. Thank you.
I think it was the closest one to 10 minutes so far. So last but not least, Benjamin Lyons, the floor is yours, and we will have 1 more perspective on education before entering part 3.
Okay, part of the pitch of today was also to make kind of evaluation recommendation. So I will do it in a very pragmatic way. 2 or 3 years after starting Civis, what do we trash? What do we keep? And what do we promote, enhance? One of the things is the hub that we have tried to put in the center of the evolution of Civis. If you want to know more about trash, you have to pay me a beer after that. What's a hub? It's just a lot of people willing to work on the same topic. I say topic, not a discipline. So a topic, a question, an issue, a societal challenge, something like that. 2 members by university. If university just wants to send one, they can, because we have big and small university, we have to manage that. A president, a coordinator, so some people that are there for making it work, and it makes a lot of about 20 people, where we try to maximize the diversity of people. So, for example, in the hub cities, territories, and mobilities, we are people ranging from usual suspects of that, architect, geographers, but also going to physicians, working on fluid dynamics, but it's really useful to understand traffic within the city. So you can go from concrete to evacuating a party, very useful, same equation. We have people from legal management, because a lot more regulation are locally based. With the regionalization of Europe, it's very useful. So the idea is in each hub have a kind of diversity of people. They can come from different universities, doesn't matter, because they have disciplinary networks to mobilize. And the idea of that is the hub is not doing project by himself, but helping people to make projects, sometimes in selecting and giving some seed money, but mainly in, let's say, promoting activities, making the role of ambassadors. So there were 4 and then 5 topics which are linked to the mission and value of Civis and also to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we decided to work in the field of health, territories, cities and mobilities, technological and digital transformation, climate, environment, energy, and society, culture, and heritage. Some are very focused. Most of them are broader, and you see that there is one more, which is not an official one, but it's part of the story, having the COVID action. Each hub, in fact, have to learn to work in the digital world. So each hub become also an expert of working in digital, but in their topics. Like we have the question of digital immunities, we have the question of, question of digital AIDS and things. So it was very interesting. It's not an official one, but we have learned to deal with that. How it's working? Only bottom-up initiative in the field. And so every project was used to challenge the existing administrative framework. In the idea, here we have a lot of people willing to do something. It's not the usual suspects of European Commission projects. A lot of them have never made a European project. They are more or less local rooted activities. They work more with cities and with the territories than working in a European country. And a lot of them say never a European project, but in the framework of Civis, providing a kind of safe place with not too much administrative hassle, it works. And by the composition, you force interdisciplinarity. There is no problem to make disciplinary networks. It's very harder to make place for interdisciplinary work. It works very well on local basis, but to make it at a European level, it could be a little bit tricky. And so it was people never working on institutional things, always trying to make real projects. But of course, we have to find our place in the reality of administrative way of the university. But it's very interesting when you identify that with your, for example, your Greek colleague, you can do that kind of project, but not that one. And so you can really make advances everyone, and that's quite very useful. And also, those people really works as ambassador, because the problem also of this kind of, let's say, the project, which is an audience at the beginning, is the fact that the internal communication is a real issue to make people participate on it. It's just a thing on top of the others. So what kind of example of activities promoted or made possible by the hub? Is all the question of the new topics emerging, so urban generation through informality, which is not a disciplinary problem. It's typically a local rooted problem. City doesn't know how to manage this, and we can use the experience of different cities to do that. Working with heritage, we have a kind of common shared heritage in Europe, but with different way. For example, Art Nouveau, of course, for Brussels, but it's also relevant for a lot of cities in Europe, but also in Africa, with the colonial and the post-colonial heritage, which is also part of it, and that's part also of the specificity of Civis to try to make things also working from the south. You have nice topics about food, which is typically today in the news, but the question of foodscapes, how can we produce our food in country? Of course, the question of the migration, the cities, the inequalities was typically the kind of project that tries, because also we have a lot of local partners. For example, how to learn people to learn the local language. We can share the methods between different languages, but also the expertise, because in linguistics, you know some knowledge from different types of language across Europe. You have the question of making Africa, in our case, part of the work. And so, for the end, only one final advice, only one. Keep place in this kind of islands for small bottom-up project, because there is a lot of programs for big things, but there is not so much room for making little projects arise. Little project could be a week, could be an excursion, could be showing a tour. All these small things, when you put it together, you make big things. And so you have to make everything is possible to keep administrative lightness as a kind of motto. And also, if you have to set framework, don't imagine big frameworks from the starting point. Just keep all the experiment that works and make the framework for it. And the framework could be different inside the alliance, because not everything is possible with every partner. And it's also a learning of working with this alliance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you, Rosette Segers. Thank you, Carina Malard, and thank you, Leticia Garcia. So we will let you get off the stage and out of the public eye for a little bit. And this next session, we have decided to make the challenge even a little bit more difficult. We've given them even less time, but that is therefore also why we have Joanne Goury from the University of Warwick, who will be on stage to make sure they do keep to the time that they've been set. So Joanne Goury, Academic Director, Education and Internationalization from the University of Warwick, and also our curriculum developer for the Utopia Connected Learning Communities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I just move a little bit the computer? It's out of the way. Yeah. Okay, so I don't think I need the microphones too much, but as Karen said, it is a challenge-driven activity. So we have to actually now continue and give 5 minutes per speaker, and also make sure that we actually keep the pace, because we want to have about 20 minutes after our last panel for a Q&A, and then I will pass the floor back to Luke to close this excellent session. So I'm going to introduce our speakers and invite them to join me here as I invite you up. So Jean-Claude Burgerman, if you could come up, a professor of open science policies and practice at Vrij University in Brussels and academic coordinator for open science at VUB. Okay. Can I invite Petra Widemsek and Karen Celis? Petra Widemsek is the Vice Dean for Research Development, Doctoral Studies at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Ljubljana, and the Utopia WP Inclusion Lead. And Karen Celis is Head of the Department of Political Science at VUB and co-director of the Research Center on Gender Diversity and Intersectionality. A warm welcome. Can I invite next Luciana Radu-Gaggi, who is from the University Sergi Paris. Luciana is the Vice President for the Utopia Alliance and also oversees sustainability with other members of the university. Welcome, Luciana. And next, I would like to invite Tony Luna, who is the Vice Rector for Internationalization at UPF and coordinator of EUTOPIA. Welcome, Tony. Okay, so an excellent panel, and the brief we were given is that we have 5 minutes continuing the conversation on the policy recommendations from education and research.
I think Joe has maybe wanted us to be even shorter than we were. We have Thomas.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so it's also, if I can also invite Thomas Dezelin, who is Professor of Political Science and the Assistant Secretary General of the University of Ljubljana, the FlexLab Coordinator and EUTOPia Educational Board Member, and a very close partner. So I don't know how that happened, but thank you very much. So I'm going to make sure you have an extra 2 minutes for that. So an excellent panel, and time is never does justice, but I'm sure we will benefit from really bringing together the collective experience. So without any other delay, I'm going to start with Jean-Claude, who is going to share 5 minutes on open science. Jean-Claude, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can be very short. The conclusion is open science is here to stay. Just do it. Well, that's the recommendation. Let me now develop it a little bit. And there are many speeches available on the internet which document what I'm going to say in extenso. So open science is nothing more than sharing the results of science, articles, reports, papers, and the building blocks to get their data, software, algorithms, what have you, metadata, to share them, to make them openly available in a format that is accessible, interoperable, reusable. For articles, that means open access. For data, that means open data. The reason why this is unavoidable is very simple, because open science gives you a better return on investment. By making things reusable, you get more out of your money as a funder, as a university. It speeds the cycle of innovation and knowledge transfer. COVID has been a perfect example of it. 400,000 articles were published under COVID, openly, in real time, even in preprint, and all the data, even with the private companies, was made available in formats that they could use from each other. So it is now widely accepted that this is one of the elements why the search for a vaccine went so fast, because of this collaborative approach. So it is simply a better way to do science. It is also a way that is logical. If you take the history of science, then, you know, we went from the brilliant individual, Einstein, the brilliant team, Bell Labs to the Brilliant Network. And the Brilliant Network is what open science is all about. You make collaborative science across the globe. It's global enterprise science possible. And so it is the logical next phase. That doesn't mean free, but that's another discussion. Now, what are the recommendations? The recommendations are, well, you can go in many directions. At the Commission, you know, we develop many things, but the building blocks, in my view, are open access of articles and research results and open data, which means making sure that your research is immediately available. Secondly, that it is done in a way that the building blocks can be reused. So what does that mean for universities? I have 3 recommendations. First of all, join forces, don't reinvent the wheel. We have a tendency in universities, there are 3,000 universities in Europe. We have a tendency to do everything ourselves and to copy, to redo it. So there is a lot of software available, there is a lot of distributed architectures available, there are metadata communities everywhere in Europe. Just use it. Don't try to do it yourself. There is even a lot available for free in the commercial circuit. Secondly, transform your libraries into knowledge platforms and into knowledge managers. And the role of a library to compile books is a little bit ridiculous. I'm sorry for that. My wife was a librarian, so I know what I'm speaking about. So it is absolutely out of date. That means I can go. It is absolutely out of date, and so transform it into digital knowledge managers. That's what we need. And thirdly, invest in data stewards. In order to make your data open, you need people that can guide you, that can help you, that can learn you how to do it. And you should do it university-wise on a faculty basis, on a disciplinary basis, rather than trying to outsource it.
Fantastic.
Well, you
So we need to speak 5 minutes now. So this is even challenging. Yeah. No, it's okay. Thank you. So as we have heard this morning, inclusion becomes quite an important word in Utopia Alliance. This morning we have heard quite a lot of people talking about inclusion. Our work package dealt with the inclusion, and we tried to find out actually how we understand inclusion in 6 different universities at the beginning. And we immediately find out that inclusion, it's not just a buzzword, it's a hard work. We are not present now our results, but what we would like to do here is to present the how. Because inclusion, as we said, is not about definition, it goes beyond definition. It is more about how it's sense of belonging, and it's also how we do it. What makes our alliance different from the others, maybe? And this in the beginning of session, we heard that inclusion is something. And how we do it was the co-creation. If we want to, we got the recommendation this morning as well, bottom up. But if we want to plan from the bottom up, then we need to ask people. 3 years ago, we aimed to create learning communities, especially for those who are disadvantaged. And in our work package from the early stage, we involve people with self-experience to take part of our work project. Not only to define the inclusion, but also to comment the work we have done. So we really come from the bottom up planning what we need to change, that the university will be open and accessible to all. And also what I would like to say, it's if we are talking about inclusion, it's also important to respect each other and to respect that we have different knowledges and that we can all learn from each other. That today, what we can say also, it's the inclusion cannot be seen as a problem that needs to be solved, but it needs to be preconditioned that the equal opportunity could happen. And this is what we meant with the transformation, and this is what we meant with the inclusion. And for the further work of we have a little bit concern how it's going to be in the next bit, our inclusion, because it's all over. We just don't want that we will just think when we defined inclusion that we've done the work. Because as we said, inclusion meant involving people, and if what it's different, what we have done as well, it's actually, no, I don't want to see this because it means I need to go. I just want to say two more things that we implemented in these 3 years. In the pilot project, it was written 3 basic concepts: co-creation, participation, and also empowerment. And if we give the voice, and if we hear the student, we empower them to have the speech, to hear what they will like to see will happen, because we do not have so good ideas what needs to be done. And we find out in our project that legislation is just not enough. It is precondition, but we need to check it, how it works in the practice. So how it works in the practice, Karen will follow up. I'm sorry. 2 minutes is really not.
Yes, so I will go from practice to then the recommendation. Very, very, very brief. And actually, I'm going to work with a cliffhanger. So I just want, what I want to achieve that is that you invite me in at a later moment so that I can give the full talk. So I'm going to give you the cliffhanger. So what we need to do, so the recommendation is actually that what we need in our university alliances and in our universities in order to do inclusion, to really create the experience of inclusion, because that's our definition of inclusion. The experience of inclusion is that we need to set up an architecture for listening. And why do I say this? Is that because if we want to co-create, if we want to cooperate, if we want to coordinate, and you can do a search in our projects, and for the search for the codes are everywhere. That means that we will have to work across differences. And that is extremely hard. Our brains are not set up for that. It's extremely hard to listen to somebody who you're not connecting with, who you don't share experience with, who have a completely different view. So that's very difficult. So, and in order to enable real communication that includes not only voice, but also hearing and listening, and really taking into consideration, you need an architecture for listening. You need time and resources for listening. You need a structure for listening. You need accountability for listening. So it's really difficult to do that. So you really need to design it. So, and if you want to hear more about the architecture of listening that we should build in our institutions and alliances, just give me a call.
Perfect.
Thank you. So I'll try to be brief and then answer the million-dollar question. And I'm going to provide you the answer on the basis of experience of working with various, I guess, networks within Utopia. And it's true, it's very difficult to actually go across the usual boundaries, institutional, and in this case also, well, boundaries that were in a way set up by different teams and groups, and obviously sometimes it's really difficult to come across and actually do something meaningful. So I'm going to start with our experience within the quality board and work package too, because to me it's the same, because I've performed both duties, I guess. And I guess it was particularly interesting as well as rewarding, because it was also at the same time the external, I would say, monitoring exercise, right? So basically I performed a role of quality board coordinator for 2 years within Utopia, and during that time we had the external monitoring check, let's say, by the NVAO, the Dutch Flemish agency, which is particularly harsh, I would say, and I guess the Dutch and Flemish colleagues know that, and it was difficult for me to grasp that as well. But nevertheless, it was a very rewarding exercise, not just for me, but I would say also for the partnership, because we learned that obviously we need to play different tasks, roles, as well as look for our future, and not just what we wrote down in the first bit. As I said, even though it was very difficult at times, we learned a lot. And within the quality board, as well as within the work package too, we started acting as if we're already some sort of bodies of the alliance of the future university, and not just the project itself. At times, this created tensions, and obviously this is where we learn how to communicate, or not, this happened as well. But nevertheless, I would say that we learned also how the entire institutional system could look like at the EU level. And at the EC report, the EC clearly noted that we did this exercise, and then we're basically commended for it, because it's hard, and then it's difficult to move beyond the things that you know a lot about. And I would say we are different and we are unique in many ways, and also the unique exercise actually recognized this, because we're also not conventionally, as is a conventional approach, targeting the product, right, the educational offering at the end, but we're basically kind of trying to set up a unique process that could deliver different products. And for this, we said, okay, I guess it's still good to run with the framework Unique provided us, but we need to have a special kind of understanding of it. And this is why we also, I guess, spent a year and a half within Utopia deliberating about how this internal system could look like, because obviously it needs to be trust-based. Yeah, we need to trust each other. We're all aligned to ESGs. We're all aligned to certain common values. I don't know yet which exactly, but still I know they're like implicit to what we do. And we need to have an additive approach, right? So what we do extra is something that actually helps us institutionally, but also as a partnership to grow, in order to actually kind of recognize or kind of go along our strategic priorities that we set up for each other. So basically my final conclusion, and this was also our recommendation in our external quality assurance vision for the Commission, is the following. It's okay to have the absence of a regulatory framework, right? We're already committed to ESGs, but we want to focus on collaboration, co-learning. Basically, we want to have the quality assurance that is integrated in also in our monitoring system of the entire alliance. We want to have a flexible and adaptable quality assurance, because we adapt to different challenges. And also, and with this I'll end, we want to have a quality assurance system that contributes to, partner institutions, regulatory and external QA obligations. So it's in addition to what we do, and we also get something as a reward for that, also when we're basically carrying out our traditional processes within our national systems and within our institutions. Thank you.
And it's very nice encapsulating how that is really a process that is feeds into sustainability and what we do in future work, which I can't think of a better bridge, Luciana, to pass on the floor to you. to connect with a lot of what we heard around sustainability and sustainable European universities. How do we get there, from your perspective?
Thank you, Jill. Lise de Potin wrote to me a few days ago inviting us to pitch 5 minutes about our subjects, and I asked her on what would you like me to speak, because we covered so many domains in the sustainability field, and we don't speak now about the green sustainability, about the long-term sustainability of the Alliance. And she said, up to you. So I have carte blanche, and that is very difficult because we invent a word with the European alliances. They didn't exist, now they exist, and we have to invent everything from the quality system to internal processes. And if I were to speak on the behalf of my university, I would say that Utopia was a great opportunity for internationalization in a systematic way, and that is a matter of sustainability. If I were to speak on the behalf of my country, as Lise suggested, France is finishing in 2 days the presidency of the European Council, and some good things happened during this 6 months. We have now a call on European diploma label, which is good, which could have been a European diploma sharp, not label, anyway. But we also say that European alliances, European universities, as they call us, are at the core of a strategy for higher education in Europe, and that is a big thing for us. And they place also quality in the center of that. We will work on that. And that is a sustainability item. If I were to speak on the behalf of my birth country, Romania, I would say that belonging to Utopia is a great advantage of being part of something bigger, which empowers us in this very difficult time where a war is going on while we are speaking. And Utopia is maybe one of the places where we can speak and do things about peace in Ukraine, but also many good things that were done in Utopia regarding the Western Balkans. And that is also about sustainability. But I could also speak to you on the behalf of Utopia. And now you heard our colleagues, you know now what's going on in Utopia. Let me tell you 2 or 3 things about the sustainability, long-term sustainability. We are now engaged in a process of having a legal entity. We chose not a European instrument, but a national Belgian Law International Association, because we think that is flexible and agile, and we want that. I could also tell you that the presidents of Utopia agreed yesterday, the 10 presidents agreed on the future governance structure, and that is a big deal because it means we know how it will be organized starting with September. We also work on the business model, and I will not say a word about that. It's a secret for the moment. We will be very much engaged starting with December, but before that also with what we call facilitating the global connected communities, connecting communities with our global partners. And thank you for our colleague from Stellenbosch University for being here. Thank you, Robert. And we also want to deliver all this for our Utopia College and Utopia Global Institute. But I will speak to you for myself. And let me tell you that just before this session with my colleague and friend, if you allow me, Roswitha Bomb from TU Dresden, we visited the Museum of the European History. Please stop everything you do and go visit this museum, because it's more important than everything that we do. It gives this one question, and that is sustainability. Why do we do this? À quoi ça sert? Why do we do this, everything that we do? And I think that we build European universities to empower youngsters, future generations, and it's not a slogan. It's like this, our kids, to empower them to understand and to explain and to heal this society, this planet, this world. And in Utopia, thanks to our friend Luc van Langenhove, we want to do that very much through science diplomacy as a priority path. And the policy recommendation is very simple. Give us your trust. This we can say to the European Commission, because we are committed to do all that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Levels together, which speaks so much for what we want to do, and particularly talking about the importance of internationalization in so many different ways. And on that, I'm going to pass on to Tommy to talk to us about internationalization, bringing this to kind of.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to be brief. I think the European alliances are facing a lot of barriers, institutional barriers at different levels. But I like to see when we wear the Utopia hat, those barriers become challenges, and those challenges transform in opportunities, and that's the way I see it. Because since there is nothing written on what the European alliance should be, then we can invent whatever we like. That's the part that's very interesting, and it's also very challenging. And I think when going very much in the same level that we didn't talk to each other, but I think I have the same thing prepared. I was thinking we go into different levels. We can go at the global level. I think one of the strategies for internationalization of this European alliance is to have a position in the world of universities. So we want to have, beyond the European Union, the possibility to be recognized as interesting universities, interesting places for education, for research, or for innovation across the world. That's the ambition from the European Union. We need to have visibility. We need to go into different types of international collaboration beyond the European Union in equal standards, not in a kind of appropriation or just getting there and trying to say what we want to do, but we're trying to have a dialogue. Maybe to explore possibilities to expand into offshore opportunities on doing teaching, research, or whatever. That will be what I think it's global. At the European level, it's probably the most challenging and more interesting because we are doing something that we don't have a regulation for. And so we are building things where we are waiting for the regulation. So I think that's bad, but at the same time it's good because we can force the regulation to go in the direction we're posing, we're creating. And that's being with Rosato, with Joe, with Luciana. They're talented people. They think about the ideas that they can become later regulations that could be transformed or they can be used for other universities. Then this idea of getting other alliances together, I think it's a fantastic idea because everyone come up with different ways to solve these challenges, and that will be interesting. Then it comes from the national level. That's when, especially coming from Spain, is a challenge. And then I realized I always thought that Spain was the worst country for regulation. And then I realized Italians are not that better. Germans are very difficult. Swedish are very difficult too. So everyone was very difficult. And then I realized something. I was thinking nation states as an institution, as an artifact, are younger than universities. Universities existed way before national states were existed. And at that moment, we didn't add nation states for anything. So maybe we can go in that direction. I was thinking probably there's only one institution that's older than us, that is the church. We don't need to go into that direction. No, that's enough. But I think that will be interesting. I think we need to do a lot of stuff because it's very interesting. Utopia, I'll keep telling that every time I talked about this in Barcelona. We are 10 countries. We have 12 different national languages in each with all the universities, and that's what Europe is. Multilingualism, different cultures, different respects of different traditions, different ways of seeing, but we can collaborate, we can work together. We can choose to choose English and maybe in other times with Latin, but we can do something. So that's the important thing. And then I think we need to work in terms of challenges, change the regulations at the national level with the support of the European level in terms of recruitment, the regulations, how do we do the degrees, how we do the recruitment of teachers, all this stuff has to be regulated in a different way. We have to collaborate together. At the regional, local level, or urban level, I think there is a lot of opportunities too, because then we can collaborate very quickly with city halls, regional governments and so on for imposing what we were discussing about the triple helix thing, this idea that we can collaborate with locals, but with extra element. So now if I go to the city hall of Barcelona, I can say, well, listen, we are doing this project, but if we work with us, then we can do things in Paris and we can do things in Brussels because these people is also working with us. So we have a connection with this. And that's something I think some city halls are starting to realize how important these alliances become for these cities. At the university level, I think it is crucial because it's also helping us to transform a lot of this inertia that we have inside the university. You have to push them. It's really hard. It's probably of all those things is the hardest thing. The European Union is easy, but getting into the into certain offices at the university, that's really, really hard. But I think it's an opportunity, and I think people, and that's something I've been talking about with the inclusiveness session. We need to have inside Utopia even those people that doesn't speak languages. And we need to be very creative with that because that is a barrier for us. So there's people that speak English or speak whatever language we're using and others they are done, and everyone has to be in the board. And finally, I think it's what we do all this for students. That's a good way to do. I have a colleague that is an expert on that. Internationalization at home. So we will be nothing more inclusive than that. So we can have internationalization without moving from one place to another. So that's something we need to do. We have to be very clever to provide things that enhance equity and inclusiveness. And I think one of the things I really like to see is that all those things we're doing is very innovative and they're coming from the public sector, not from the private sector. And that's very interesting from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think what we have seen with both panels is that we are all engaging with the need to really think how we synchronize our offering to the world around us. We all know that we're facing problems that no countries, no languages, no disciplines, and need to be addressed across countries, across languages, and across disciplines. And the question is, how do we get there, and how we can in the process make sure that we benefit from the expertise and the knowledge that we're creating. So this event has been really excellent in terms of making sure that we open that alliances share, that we don't become silos, but also internally, it is really wonderful that we actually come together and we share very much the experience, particularly as we're actually moving to the sort of next phase and so on. Our speakers have been generally very, very well disciplined. So I think, first of all, we need to give a round of applause to everybody for the 10 minutes, the 5 minutes, the sound and so on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I would really like is to make sure we have questions for both panels. I think you can stay here, and I don't know if we have enough chairs to actually invite the speakers from our first panel up.
Could share the chair.
Yes. Do we have enough chairs, Lisa? Yes, we do. Okay, we'll give ourselves. No, we'll give ourselves, come up, Rosette. We'll give ourselves, you need to go. Oh, okay, all right. Yes, I thought we immediately after. All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we have enough fits. No, we do, yes. Just to listen and he needs to go. So let's all right. Okay, so some colleagues need to go. Unfortunately, flights, travel, disruption, strikes, this is not easy, but please Okay, so I'm going to split those two because we're all very experienced educators, right? So I'm going to position myself over here because I suspect some troublemaking. Right, okay, so we have 20 minutes for questions and discussion, I would say. So I would also invite you to actually really raise any questions for fellow panelists and so on. But I will start first with the audience. Please, over to you. I know it's late, has been a long day, but it is wonderful that we have the opportunity to be here. Yes. So we have to go steps now, Lisa. It's a pass the baton, it's teamwork.
Okay. Actually, I would like to make a comment, especially to continue from what Tony said, which I completely agree. And thank everybody for all the good thoughts. Actually, I'm a rector from Ljubljana University. 20 years or 15 years ago, we were talking a lot about European of the regions, and somehow we forgot about that. And I think that is really important concept that now we came to the European of the countries, and this is sometimes hindering the Europe progress because the countries have their own interest. And maybe with the alliances, we should try to push that concept of the European of the regions, because I think this could solve a lot of problems in the Europe. Not just big problems like we have UPF, which is in Catalan region, which we all know what was happening a few years ago, but also small, like how to develop policies and things like that, because each country has its own ideas and agenda. With the European of the regions, we could overcome a lot of these problems. I know it wouldn't be easy, it would be a long term, but maybe with the alliances, we could start to talk about that and push this agenda.
Important how we actually think of place and how we think about sort of crossing and transcending borders. Anybody wants?
I think it's linked, of course, to the way that the alliances are, let's say, formatted, because you choose individual universities as members. So in a region, you can, of course, have, I think, universities operating in the same region, but also being affiliated to different alliances. So in fact, that makes it, impossible, I think, to speak at regional level without, really having a possibility for cross-alliance talks and participation.
Yes.
Another switch in the discourse of the Commission, if you want, is what we hear more and more these last months, years, is Europe in the world. We didn't have that before, right? We had regions, now we have countries, but we also have the voice of Europe in the world. And we are also here, alliances, to speak that voice, to be heard at the international level. And that is interesting. I have no solution for the issue that you raised, Gregor, but this is, look, another way of looking at things.
Yeah, maybe. I think that, in fact, regions are there because when you see in Ireland, the organization of the different universities is also linked to the story. Of course, in Belgium, it's not directly a region, but it's communities, but it's a small thing. Quite like this, but it's also the case with the Länder in Germany and things like that. So I think there is a different relation between the alliance with their rooted region, and it's also interesting because, for example, speaking with your French participant, and also the question of the dealing with very centralized states and very uncentralized states, it makes arise a new way of thinking. So I would not say that regions are not there. And for the question, Europe in the world, I think that the question of the cooperation with university in the rest of the world and the role of alliances to do that in a new way, in a post-colonial way, maybe if we have to tackle with the new question of global change, importing solutions from the south to Europe and not the reverse. It's clearly there is a kind of openness there, and also an openness at the Commission, because we see that we can change the rules, for example, very practically for financing people from outside Europe participating to the alliance. There are some doors little bit open, and we can use it also because it's always ongoing project. So I will be a little bit optimistic about that, but of course, always with the same approach, there is diversity in the partnership.
Yeah, I have a question. Since we are here, a meeting of two alliances, Civis and Utopia, with similar principles and approaches. But the difference that I could tell that we decided to start at the bottom level of education. If I understood Civis, which is for me the first encounter, you start to cooperate on the level of research. So somewhere in the middle, I would like to get some idea what were the reasons that motivated both alliances for their choices. Yeah, so Civis, why this focus on research and also we.
Shall I start then saying something about the Utopia part when it comes to the research? And I think that really stemmed from, I mean, there was quite a small part in the Utopia 2050 pilot project that was actually allocated to research. But then as that grew and we got additional funding for specific projects, I think that's how it's really evolved over time. And we have seen many, many different opportunities that develop because of that. And now we're starting also to see the connections, like I said before, that we think the link between research, education, innovation is extremely important. And we're now starting to see some signs of that within our alliance, which I think is really nice.
Well, since Karina said something very similar to what is happening in Research for Civis, so the research part of Civis. So basically, we engage in these discussions where we have common obstacles. We have we have similar priorities sometimes, and then what we just do is just to really focusing in two ways. We focus it from an individual perspective. Therefore, if I'm interested in a university, in a service that you have, or in something that really interests me, then we start creating this kind of collaboration. But also the obstacles that are common to us, we can address them together sometimes. And this is what really, I think, is the core of the research perspective in Civis. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll actually share my perception. I guess you're right. I mean, from the start, it was clear that we want to push forward the pedagogical model, right? But what we wanted to do also was to actually have a twist on the pedagogical model, because obviously there is European collaboration in that area. They're called joint degrees. We have the European approach, and we learned there are many problems with that. So we wanted to push for the educational side of it, but also with a bit of reflection about what's going on there and where basically the problems are, and then these are the problems. It can be of regions. For example, we have one member where basically regional rules are actually quite stiff. Then we have national systems, and obviously there are different traditions and so on. So what we wanted to do is actually look at it from the pedagogical perspective, bring it to the, let's say, to the next level, and then link it to research, because we're all also research intensive universities, and it doesn't make sense to have it like a two-pillar structure, which we usually have, at least in terms of the way we're being assessed. Yeah, right. So basically, this is why we actually wanted to also push forward for the recognition of the educational side of what we do, and not just the research side. And I guess this is actually something that the Commission also wanted from the European universities, and this is what we hope it will continue doing.
It also opens, I think, the way for reinforcing the attention, the focus of the EU as for policy measures towards education. Because, of course, if we compare the number of initiatives that have been there in the past decennia, then they were, well, a majority, except the Erasmus mobility programs, are really working on networks that are stimulating innovation and research rather than education, because it's very difficult to do it at EU level, because do not have the direct authority for education. And that is, I think, quite important that we keep on saying that we want to align to EU policies, because then EU policies will reinforce us.
We know how to do international research. We are much more to learn to do international education, and much more of sort of barriers, but also opportunities and enablers. Okay, last roll of the dice before I get them off the hook. Yes, Robert.
Thank you. I'm the real outsider here, coming from the deep south. But I feel extremely welcome, so and included. My perception is that with all the EU projects like Horizon and all the Erasmus and things like that, it was about the subject, and it was about a research group or people learning to know each other. And I see these alliances as a wonderful thing of institutions to learn with from the other institution, and the institutional developments that have been coming out in my 18 months of being involved as a sort of a look inside is quite interesting to experience and to see how it's about institutional growth and institutional Europeanization happening, which I think can be very valuable. The one thing that I attended my first EAIE in 1995, I think, or 6, in The Hague, and people talk of internationalization, and then I said, no, it's actually Europeanization. And I still have that notion in me when I hear about the global partners, the international partners, and so on. So that thing is still a bit fuzzy in my head, but the institutional learning that's happening is quite wonderful to see and experience that.
I can project, and teaching does many great things for learning of us. So, okay, a great last point and question to really bring it together. And I'm going to pass on to Tony to really respond. And also, then I promise that I'm going to pass on the floor to Luc for summarizing this excellent panel. Right, Tony, over to you.
I think my experience with international relations at the university before, when we were doing Erasmus things, Erasmus agreements, it was we didn't show the dark side of our institution. We just show how wonderful we were, and we never talk. In this one, everyone is opening the dark box, and we're showing this is our problems, and that's the real international collaboration. And I think that opens up to go beyond the European. And I think we are big defenders of going beyond the European level, because we need that. We need really that connection. And the other thing is very interesting. Each of us has different traditions of collaboration with different universities for cultural issues, for post-colonial, whatever you want to call it, but we have those connections. And then we are summing up. So for example, for Spanish universities, collaborating with South Africa is very hard. But through the help of my colleagues, we can now get into South Africa. And maybe for them, we can help them with Latin America, with other places. It's easier for us to collaborate, and we have a much longer tradition. So it opens up a lot of those possibilities in the future. But the truth is, being in these meetings at the Utopia, it's when you feel what it is to be a European, in the bad and the good sense, even if you are British, including that. So, but I mean, you learn about those things, and I think it's one of the things comes from different cultures, but we know how to work together in a particular goal, and that's very interesting these times.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the collective experience and how much we can learn from coming together is really something that I hope we are all taking on, and the potential is evident. Also, that we have a long way to go, but I believe we have addressed so much that what we really need is to work together to make sure that this wonderful pilot becomes the mainstream in our institutions and is not a sort of wonderful educational firework or research firework or impact firework where we do and it remains at project level, because that was never the intention. It was always really to bring the change to become what we want for the university of the future. So fantastic 2 panels. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry that we imposed all the constraints onto you, but you did a brilliant job. So thank you very much. Thank you to you. And I'm going to invite Luke to come back and do the most difficult work to summarize all that. And very appropriately also perform the speech act of the day and close the meeting. So Luke, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Wish I had taken the listen.
I don't know what's happening with my, maybe this one. Hang on. Maybe that.
Is that better? Yes, that seems better. Okay, good. So I was saying, I wish I had taken that course on how to listen from current Civis before this, because I'm really not good in listening and there's nothing making conclusions. But, well, actually, it's because I have too much fantasy. I always fantasize. These days I call it thought experiments. And I was actually thinking this, when I was making the introduction, I was referring to this OECD director who in '73 said some interesting things about higher education. What if that was taking place here so many years ago, and at one moment he takes the microphone and there was a big lightning and he's struck and he brain wet. And then the day after, or a couple of hours after, he's kidnapped by aliens. You can go far in your fantasy, of course. He's kidnapped by aliens. He's kept in the refrigerator until today. He wakes up and he says, hey, there is something going on, organized by Utopia and Civis. That seems to be strange. European University alliances. Let's have a look. What would he have thought of all the things that he heard? Well, I think he would be very much surprised to see the kind of willingness to accept change in the university system that was exposed here. It is extremely wonderful to hear that so many people stress the need that the higher education system needs to change and that they should be ambitious to do so in different directions. And of course, it's not change as such, change out of the blue. It is a change process that is linked to values, to norms, like sustainable development, like inclusion, and stuff like that. Secondly, I think the person would also say he heard quite a lot of terms of which he has never heard before. The Erasmus program, the mobility schemes, all the tools that the European Commission has available. So then he will be flabbergasted and say, wow, there seems to be a lot of capacity to foster change, to stimulate change, to support change, thanks to especially what the European Commission is doing. But of course, there is also a third element. So you have the ambitions or the willingness to change, you have the capacity to implement change, and then 3, there is the idea of the acceptance of change. To what extent the people around you, the environment in which you operate, is going to accept it. And there we see that still today, and that was also in '73, '74 already the case, there are quite a lot of legal and perhaps also economic, but mainly legal, I would say, barriers that would provide, let's say, the opposite of incentives for change. So there's a lot going on, and there is a lot happening at this moment. But one thing that I would draw as a conclusion is that the old saying that transforming a university is like transforming a graveyard. That means that in both cases you will not have much help from within. It's not valid anymore. Because this process that we are witnessing today is actually steered from within. And that is, I think, the very good news. And with this, which is not really a very conclusion, with this I will end. Thank you very much.